Right. I think we've got a quorum already, so may I now call the meeting to order. Item 1 on the agenda. Information papers issued since the last meeting. We've received 3 papers. First, the administration's information paper on the proposal to amend the schedule to the Po Leung Kuk Ordinance. This is paper CB 2605-1314-01. Dr. Helena Wong and Dr. Kenneth Chan wrote to me on the 6th of January on the recent incidents of alleged match fixing in matches of the Hong Kong Soccer League. This is paper 617-01. Now concerning the first paper, no member has requested that there should be a discussion. And with regard to the 2 letters, members, do we want to ask the administration to give us an information paper, or do we want to have a discussion at one of our future meetings? Dr. Kenneth Chan. Chairman, concerning the recent incidents of alleged match fixing, 2 soccer teams are involved. Now we've spent so much time, so much money on the Project Phoenix, and I think. And I understand that Project Phoenix will be completed in a few months' time, and I'm sure the administration will be carrying out a review. I think the panel should have a discussion on the soccer development in Hong Kong, Project Phoenix, and also related issues. I hope that we can invite some views on such matters before the completion of Project Phoenix, so that we'll be armed with information to hold a discussion with the administration. So my letter relates to Project Phoenix and also to the recent incidents of alleged match fixing in the matches of the Hong Kong Soccer League. Mr. Ip Kok Him. Chairman, now the Project Phoenix will come to an end in September. And I think in the light of the recent events, we should have a discussion, and we should also have a reply from the administration. And concerning alleged match fixing, I understand that investigations are underway. And so I think we should have a discussion on soccer development and the administration's policies on promoting soccer. All right, so we'll ask the administration to give us an update on the Project Phoenix. Item 2 on the agenda, date of next meeting and items for discussion. We're going to have a special meeting on the 24th of January, and the Secretary will come to brief us on the policy initiatives of the Bureau as outlined in the policy address. And then we're going to have our next regular meeting on the 17th of February. The administration proposes that we should discuss 2 items. First, licensing control of internet cafes. And then second, now in fact we intended to discuss government's youth development policy in February, but the administration has proposed that we should instead discuss item 4 on the list of outstanding items, amendments to the Chinese permanent cemeteries rules. Right. I think we can move on to agenda item number 3. Please invite the officials in. Item 3, planning of the multipurpose sports complex and related staffing proposal. We have with us Mr. Raymond Young, the Permanent Secretary for Home Affairs, Mr. Jonathan McKinney, Deputy Secretary for Home Affairs, and Ms. Patty Lai, Principal Assistant Secretary for Home Affairs. I understand that there will be a PowerPoint presentation for us. Is that right? The Permanent Secretary, please. Yes, Chairman. As members are aware, we've decided to build the multi-purpose sports complex, MPSC, at Kai Tak. Last time we said that we would carry out a study on the financing options. In fact, we carried out extensive consultation with the relevant sectors, including the sports sector. We also had a discussion with financial experts, and we were of the view that funding had to come from the government. But then concerning construction and operation, we would need to have private sector participation. I'll invite Mr. McKinney to give my members an introduction. We have to carry out some advanced works, and we'll be going to PWSC and FC. We hope that members will support our proposal. Now, the MPSC is a rather huge project, and so we hope that our members can also support our staffing proposals. Thank you, Mr. McKinney.
I'll do a very, very brief recap. I'm sure members are aware of the fact that government's main policy objectives for sport, as we've reported here many times, are to promote sport in the community, support elite sport, and also to ensure that Hong Kong remains a centre for major international sports events. Now, in delivering against these objectives, we do face a number of challenges, in particular in terms of the provision of sports facilities. In terms of promoting sport in the community, there's a shortage of public sports facilities, and as we've described in the paper, in the area around Kai Tak and East Kowloon in particular, we're short of facilities such as public sports grounds and indoor sports centres. In terms of international events, we rely very heavily on ageing venues, which are not meeting the standards that are required for some of the major international events that we would like to keep and attract to Hong Kong. In particular, the Hong Kong Stadium, the Hong Kong Coliseum, the Queen Elizabeth Stadium, these are all old venues, and they do face problems in terms of spectator capacity, in terms of their flexibility for multiple uses, and in terms of playing area. As the Permanent Secretary has just said, we've spent some time looking at the financing and procurement options for this project. It is a large, complex and potentially expensive project, and therefore we've spent some time looking at alternative financing options that would involve private sector participation. After an extensive study, we have concluded that we feel that the best way of taking forward this project is to fully fund the capital development cost from the Public Works programme, but also to involve the private sector in the long-term operation of the complex. We feel that this approach will give us the greatest certainty in terms of achieving the project objectives, but it will also allow us to harness the expertise and creativity of the private sector in terms of the long-term operation. Just very quickly, we have previously briefed members on the project scope, so I'll recap. The main event venues will be a 50,000-seat main stadium, with a retractable roof for maximum flexibility in operation. In addition, a 5,000-seat public sports ground and an indoor sports centre that will include an indoor arena with a minimum of 4,000 fixed seats. The project, and in particular the sports ground and the indoor sports centre, will provide a large amount of scope for providing public sports facilities. The sports ground will have a running track. It will be suitable for public jogging, for schools and sports associations, athletics meets, and also for community sports, rugby, football matches, etc. The indoor sports centre will have a large number of indoor sports facilities for sports such as badminton, wushu, table tennis that can be used on a regular basis by the community. Within The complex, there will of course be a fair amount of park-type space for less intensive forms of sport and recreation. These will include things like jogging trails. There will be a cycle track that will be linked with the wider Kai-Tak cycling network, and there will also be spaces for activities for children, for the elderly, and other park-type activities. And in addition, we're making provision within the complex for office space, a large amount of which we would earmark for local sports organisations, but also potentially to attract Asian and international sports organisations to be headquartered in Hong Kong, and also retail and F&B outlets which would serve the users of the complex and also, we feel, generate additional traffic to ensure that this is a lively and dynamic complex. Against that background, this is the current conceptual layout plan for the Kai-Tak Sports Complex, with the main 50,000-seat stadium shown at the southern portion of the site. And next to the stadium, you can see there is the office and commercial area. To the northern portion, across the distributor road, there is the public sports ground in the west corner and the indoor sports centre with the main arena to the northern side there. The rest of that space will be largely open space. However, you can see there is also the need for a large podium deck area, and this is to ensure easy access across the distributor road, in particular for major events at the main stadium building, when you'll be looking at dispersing crowds of up to 50,000 people. So there is a need for a very strong connectivity across that distributor road. We're now in a position where, having done all our procurement and financial studies, we would like to get moving with this project. Members of this panel and members of the sports community and the public have shown great patience, but have continually asked us to make good progress with this project. And in his policy address, the CE has described this as a planning priority. We would now like to move forward with the pre-construction work for this project to start in mid-2014. This will include technical issues such as quantity surveying, ground investigation, planning and consultancy services, and also some specialist research on issues relating to stadium design, in particular the use of the retractable roof and finding the right turfing and ground systems that will ensure the best operation for this. And our aim is to go to the Public Works Subcommittee for endorsement for the pre-construction funding in the sum of about $50 million in the middle of this year before seeking Finance Committee's approval. In terms of the broader timetable, subject to approval from the PWSC and Finance Committee, we would like to take forward the pre-construction work from mid-2014 onwards. We aim to start preparing for a formal tender exercise for the main project in 2015. And further, and subject to LegCo funding approval for the main project itself, we would aim to start construction in 2016. Based on experience that we've seen elsewhere, we estimate that this would be a 3 to 4 year construction job, so we're looking at completion in 2019 to 2020. Now, this is quite an ambitious timetable, but it does represent an achievable target. However, if we're going to make good progress towards this, we will need additional resources within the Home Affairs Bureau in order to drive this project forward. And to this end, we would propose to establish a small but dedicated team led by a Directorate Officer at AO Staff Grade C, that's D2 level, and assisted by expertise from architectural and engineering disciplines and appropriate secretarial support to take forward this project. And we would go to the establishment subcommittee at the end of this month to seek the approval for the creation of this team, which would cost approximately $6.5 million annually over the next 2 years. This team would then drive forward the timetable that we've just discussed. This simply shows the structure. The team would fit into the Home Affairs Bureau. It would report directly to the Deputy Secretary responsible for delivering this project, and it would have, as you can see there, sufficient technical expertise to ensure that good progress can be made. Okay, that's all I have, Chairman, but that's a very simple outline. There's more detail in the paper, and of course we're very happy to take members' questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. McKinley. We'll now start Q&A. Before we start, let me remind you that according to 83A, Rules of Procedure, if you have any pecuniary interests, financial interests, you need to declare before speaking. Currently, we have 5 speakers. Chan Galop, Yip Kok Him, myself, 胡志偉、黃碧雲、李慧瓊、林大輝、姚思榮、蔣麗雲、易志明。So 4 minutes for Q&A. We've been expecting this for a long time. We like to see sufficient hardware, facilities to complement the policy. The policy has been around for a while. Sport is being part of life and so on. We need to have regular review of this policy, and so I think they go hand in hand. So we should take this opportunity to review the policy as well. I have a couple of views. First of all, regarding construction expenditure recently in the FC or Public Works Subcommittee, we've been over budget in a lot of projects. So regarding surveying fees or pre-construction fees, how much money will be spent at the end? We have to be very careful. We don't want to see success at the expense of, let's say, a year down the road or a few years down the road. You come back and say that it's going over budget, we need to spend hundreds of millions or even more. So I'd like to remind you, in light of other projects, each department has its own policy, objectives, but when you lose sight of the trees because of the forest, you can say that, well, according to your department, your most accurate figures, this is the figure, but then you have to also consider the market, labor costs, material costs. Then you realize, no, that's not the case. The government is in competition for machinery, for labor, for material. So before you approach PWSC or FC, this figure might not be correct. So even though it's disclosed, I would call for accurate figures. Otherwise, when we question you why you came out with this figure and why is there a new figure now, we also see a lot of reports. You want the government to foot the bill, but then it will be run by the private sector. Well, I think we need to deliberate over this. What do you mean by privately run? When you talk about privately run, there's a question of accountability, whether it can comply with government policy, and the profits, the profitability. Will there be a shortfall or deviation from government policy? For example, if there is a naming ceremony for the facilities, can anybody who has paid a sufficient sum have his ancestors' names attached to the facility? Well, this is controversial. So if the government says, we're not going to play any role, they're going to run the facility, well, I don't think that's what the public expect, and that's not what the council members would expect either. So we have to be very careful. What do you mean by privately run? What's the corporate governance, corporate structure? Or is the government just going to turn a blind eye, sign the contract? I'm very worried. And the third opinion is that this is a very ambitious plan. So I have no problem with that if you have to create new posts. But for the administrative grade director officer, you have to follow up with all kinds of issues. Well, could you explain? Do we have to include PRL, the private land covenants? Well, time's up. So could you give us a brief response? On the last point, we don't have staff to handle the private recreation club leases. There are a lot of people that need to be liaised, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So we would like, in the first 6 months of the project, before it's really busy, we would like to have this new colleague conduct that review as well, because it will have to be concluded by the end of this year. Mr. Yip Kok Kim, regarding the Kai Tak MPSC, I'm very happy because we see if Hong Kong can compare to other countries, if we can host international events. Given our current facilities, it's insufficient. So we also need to promote our own sports culture. So regarding the MPSC, it's worthy of support, and there are expectations within the community. But there are some questions. This scale, is it appropriate? We have now indoor and other facilities concentrated in one area. Is that suitable, and is that the best land use arrangement? Perhaps you might not need 3, just 2 facilities. Why do we need other facilities in this area? I would like clarification on this. If you look at RTHK Broadcasting House, this complex, we should learn from the RTHK example, because the government is different from the private sector. In the private sector, there is much more negotiating space. They have to comply with a tender, but now the government, they have to increase when they call for a price increase. So is this appropriate? I have reservations. Is there a second option to deal with this? So let me have them answer. Mr. Yip asked about the scale. These 3 stadiums was the result of consultation with the industry, with the community, with the sports industry. The hardware is the stadium, the 50,000 seat stadium. Any international stadium needs to have a side venue. They need to warm up, or they have some pre-event venues. So we need to have a large stadium and a side venue. So why do we also have an indoor stadium in the area? It's a matter of convenience, because that district has a shortfall of district facilities. We also have a synergy effect. This is not a singular project. It's almost like a sports city. So we feel it's appropriate to have district facilities in this MPSC. There's a synergy effect. Member also asked about design, build, operate. Is that a good option? In order to ensure that this facility can operate efficiently, we want to introduce private participation, because the LCSD is responsible for operations of facilities. They don't have the staff, the experience to operate such a facility, because this facility can it has to rely on commercial revenues, you cannot just rent it out for events and competitions. You have to rent it out to different events, for example, for entertainment or sports competitions, in order to balance its budget. So the government doesn't have this experience, so we would like to have a consortium to put in a tender to build and operate, and also operate this facility. So we feel this is a more appropriate approach. Well, I have a few questions. On behalf of the industry, I would welcome this project to start as soon as possible. After hearing the presentation, I've identified a few problems. Well, we have some 28 hectares of land. I feel that the land use is not efficient. Since we have this complex, we should try to include or increase the number of facilities within the limits of plot ratio and so on. For example, there is a Nulla, the Kai Tak Nulla. You can improve the, you can clear up the pollution and turn it into a water sports venue. You can convene dragon boat races, canoe races, and so on. And I don't think your indoor complex can satisfy all needs. We need ice skating facilities. We don't have facilities. Bowling doesn't have facilities. So this indoor complex can be a multi-purpose for not just practice. You can also allow it for public use.
And so I'm of the view that more facilities should be provided. If there are more facilities, then there will be more people going to the area. And as a result, there will be more patronage for your commercial facilities. And office space, only about 10,000 square meters, that's not enough. You know, there is the Olympic House right next to the Hong Kong Stadium, but then the Olympic House is really not able to meet the demand for office space on the part of NSAs and sports organizations. And then 31,500 square meters of commercial space. Do you think that would be enough to generate revenue to support the entire MPSC project? Now, because if the scale is not big enough, then the rental will not be high. Now, for the cruise terminal, it's a very big project, $8 billion, but then the commercial space, is it enough? And here, I'm worried the amount of commercial space will not be enough. And then concerning financing, you hope to have private sector participation with regard to the long-term operation of the MPSC. But do you have a business plan or a business model to for the private sector? And Chairman, thank you. Concerning your last point, the consultancy study on financing options was completed, and after that there were meetings with the industry, and in fact there was an invitation of expression of interest exercise, and many companies told us that the business would be viable, but of course they pointed out that the construction cost would have to be borne by the government. They were able to come up with viable calculations concerning construction cost or the operation cost. In fact, our consultants have also worked out a number of scenarios for us. For example, what programs, what events there can be, the projected revenue, and so on and so forth. What about the provision of more facilities. Yes, this can be considered. Now, for example, 10,000 square meters of office space and also commercial space, 31,000 square meters. Yes, consideration can be given to increasing the provision of such space. And then, Chairman, you mentioned bowling facilities, and I believe such facilities can be provided within the commercial space because bowling facilities are commercial facilities. I don't think the NSA would agree. They don't think it's enough just to provide a commercial bowling center. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, I don't want to take up too much of other members' time. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, now this is going to be a very tight schedule, Chairman. Now, in the coming 4 to 5 years, there will be a lot of government projects. And you can see that construction costs are escalating very rapidly. So I think we have to review the construction schedules of the various projects. Is it that our government projects or the construction of these should be phased? There should be prioritization. In fact, I've asked this question many times in this panel, and that is concerning the MPSC. What's going to be the function and the role and the utilization of this MPSC, and how does this MPSC compare with our other sports facilities? I haven't got a paper from the administration on this. I have to convince the public that the MPSC will not become another white elephant. Look at the Hong Kong Stadium. On how many occasions is the Hong Kong Stadium used annually? Only several. So how can you convince the public that there will be synergy between this complex and other sports facilities? We don't want to see another white elephant in Hong Kong. And then, initially, it was said that there would be an elitist athletic center in this complex. So why is it that we can no longer see this elitist athletic training center? We want the government to formulate a policy on promoting elitist athletic training. Having such a training center will help promote such a policy in Hong Kong. And then concerning staffing, I do not support the proposals. I understand that you need to carry out a review on the PLLs. But you know, these leases will expire only 15 years later. The only exception is the Fanling Golf Course. Have you written to the Fanling Golf Course that when the lease expires in 2020, it will not be renewed? Now, because with these leases will not expire till 15 years later, and I think concerning such the rest of the work that can be absorbed by others in the Bureau. Chairman, I want to point out that the new colleague will primarily be responsible for the MPSC, but then in the first year, he or she may be able to also take up the work of the review of the PLLs. In fact, the Director of Audit and members want us to start the review as soon as possible, not waiting until a decade later, for example. And I want to say that there won't be any duplication. We do not have such a facility or a facility of this sort in Hong Kong. We need to meet international standards. In fact, we are lagging behind quite a lot when we compare ourselves with our neighboring neighboring places and countries. And then Hong Kong Stadium and other facilities, they are aging. They can't really meet present-day needs and demands. And then elite sports. Now, this place is not for the training of elite athletes. We have the Sports Institute, and in fact, we've spent about $2 billion on the redevelopment of the Hong Kong SI, and that's the main training base for elite athletes. Ms. Helena Wong. Yes, Chairman. Now, with regard to our list of outstanding items for discussion, item 19 is sports policy, and it's regrettable that sports policy is still on the list of outstanding items. We still haven't got a timetable to discuss this issue. I think we should have asked the administration to give us a detailed paper, and we should have a detailed discussion. And we should also perhaps hold a public hearing to hear or to listen to the views of the elitist athletes, non-elitist athletes, the NSAs, and so on and so forth. I think we have to have the hardware, but we also need to have the software. The hardware and the software must go hand in hand. We can't simply say, oh, it's good to have one more venue. It's good to have a complex at Kai Tak. We need to have, we need to know your policies. We need to know what you're going to do about the software in order that we can respond to your proposal to build the MPSC. Now, you know, it seems that you're emphasizing ball games here at the MPSC. Table tennis, volleyball, basketball, badminton, soccer, or whatever. So why not an indoor swimming pool? So why have you selected these sports and not others? Is it that at the moment in Hong Kong we don't have enough facilities for ball games, or is it that you think Hong Kong people can excel in the area of ball games? So why these and not others? For example, bowling. Why not bowling facilities? Why not an indoor swimming pool? So what are your criteria? I think you've got the sequence wrong. I would suggest that we shelve this matter. Let's discuss the government's sports policy first. We want the administration to give us a detailed paper on its sports policy. Now, I want to ask you this question, for example. This MPSC, for whom are you constructing the MPSC? For the elitists or the elite athletes, or for the general public? Do you want to provide sports venues for schools, for inter-school competitions, or for the general public? Or do you want to have venues for international sports events? Now, or are you telling me that in Hong Kong very few people want to become full-time athletes because there are no prospects? And I understand that there is a scheme to provide them with scholarships, allowances, and so on and so forth. So who will benefit? So what is this MPSC for? Who is it for? The elite athletes or the general public? So you have to set the policy first, and then you select the facilities to be provided. So why only venues for ball games? Why only these facilities and not other facilities? Now, I won't go into the details at this stage, in fact, concerning the exhaust gas and so on and so forth. I think we should discuss a paper from the administration on the sports policy first, and that paper must be a detailed one. All right, you've used up your time. The administration is not able to respond. Right, Ms. Dari Lee. Chairman, I'm concerned about the consultancy study on the financing options. In fact, we have had many such consultancy studies, and you've told us that there are a number of options. So can you tell us more about the options in the consultancy report? Tell us the content of the options. And your conclusion is that you want to involve the private sector in the long-term operation of the MPSC. Yes, I do agree that there are merits in adopting this approach because we have never had such a big sports venue, and even if the government tells us that it will operate the venue, we may be a bit concerned. But then I think you should give us more details. You're going to ask the private sector to operate the venue. So what's going to be the duration of the contract? And have you made reference to overseas examples? So I think I need more details on this. And I want to say that I don't know which consultancy firm you've hired, and the accountancy firm that I'm working for does provide consultancy services for the government. So I don't know whether I need to make a disclosure or not. Yes, thank you, Chairman. The consultancy company studied 4 to 5 financing options, and detailed analysis was carried out, and this option was considered to be the preferred option. Now, options that have been considered include government providing a site, and then a private sector operator will take care of the venue. But then, according to the companies, no one will be interested. And then another option that has been explored is that the government should set up a joint venture with a consortium, or we've considered the Asian World Expo model with government equity.
We've considered that, and our past experience wasn't that great, so that was not chosen. There's also another proposal where the private sector raises bonds and debentures, but that's very complex. Another innovative approach where a reference was drawn from the Singapore Sports Hub. The government does not inject funds in one go. It's injected in phases. There are some KPIs, and then they would release some funds, but it would be designed and built and operated by the consortium, and it would have to meet certain government requirements, and then the government would release funds. But it's almost fully paid by the government in that option. So we examined 4 or 5 options, and we felt that this was appropriate. So we're at the initial phases, and there will be further funding in the FC later on. The follow-up is, have you looked at cost control? Because we're always over budget. Could you respond? Is there any cost control? Yes. We do have a lot of new speakers. We have limited time. Next we have Lam Dai Fai. Thank you, Chairman. I support the sports complex, and I hope the planning can be completed as soon as possible, and we can start work by 2016. And through this sports complex, we hope we can promote elite sports. But in fact, as some speakers said, even though this plot is large, but it's not possible to include all sports. It's not realistic. So I hope the administration combine community facilities. For example, we mentioned swimming pools were mentioned just now. The sports center has swimming pools for its elite athletes, but in this sports complex they don't have swimming pools. But if we spend money here, then swimming pools in the other 18 districts, they can complement each other. It's very hard to include cycling, ice hockey, hockey. The Hong Kong has some 70 NSAs, but there are more than 70 sports, of course, so the government needs to balance the different needs. This is also a large investment. We're talking about 23 billion, and that's according to 2013 September money of day figures. And I think by 2016, if you look at Lin Tong, Central Wan Chai bypass, their extra funding, this is very commonplace now. So in 2016, when they start work, I think it's very likely that they will seek extra funding. So increase of 40% is an increase of 10 billion. And in 2016 is an election year. We would be caught between a rock and a hard place on whether to support extra funding or not. And since this is such a large investment, we've never built a sports city with government funding. So public use is very important, even though I mentioned having the focus on elite sports, the democratization of usage, and promoting sports. Well, if we open it up to the public, then I think maintenance fees will be exorbitant. But if you don't open it up, the public will be up in arms. 50,000 seats, stadium. How many events do we have that will have a full house? So if usage is low, we'll be criticized. So just like the Hong Kong Stadium, it's now a concert hall. And in Hong Kong Stadium, if you use it too much, then the grass will be in a state of disrepair. So we need to strike a balance. So if we build a sports complex, it will add to the government burden. I'll continue in the second round. Mr. Yu Si-wing. This is a very large-scale project, and operating costs will be very high. I think it will be very difficult to make ends meet. If you look at the cruise terminal, ultimately they had to find a private operator. They had to, and the operator was only willing to take it on at a low tender price. So in paragraph 15, it says that we have to ensure that we need to review the PRL policy, the private recreational lease, and could you consider, on this occasion, expanding the role of the committee, that is to conduct a study on their expenditure and income. I'm worried that large expenditure will lead to a heavy burden on the government's part. So this steering group should look at cost control and should consider the qualifications of the tender submitters, and they should also draw reference from overseas experience to examine the qualifications of tender submitters. And we should avoid finding a last-minute operator. So I wonder what is the government's stance. I agree with Mr. Yu's views. Our steering group will look at this perspective. The steering group, while we've started the pre-works, we're also now drafting the tender. So all the specifications have to be implemented in the coming year. So the steering group will make suggestions. That is, what sort of consortium would help us design, build, and operate this complex, this consortium or whatever. What sort of experience should it possess? How long should this design, build, operate term be? Usually it's 25 years. And within the consortium, what should it include? It should have construction experience, operational experience, because this venue is not just only for sports. It can also conduct entertainment operations, so it has to be this consortium has to be multi-talented. And what are their finance forecasts? How many events can they hold? How much income can they generate? And are we satisfied that they can sustain their operations? Can they be self-sustaining? So in each step, we will have careful consideration. So this steering group will look at the sustainability of the sports complex. They will also vet the qualifications of the consortium. It's not written in the document. We won't spell it out in such detail. So we will ensure that all the work is done. I'm sorry, next. Zhang Laiwan. The first question. This large 50,000 stadium, our Hong Kong stadium can seat 40,000. What's the usage rate? For example, in 1 year, how many events can we hold, and what's the attendance on each occasion? I'm aware rugby sevens, it's a full house. It's not 100%. There are seats available. So I'd like more figures. So why do we need to support this project? And I just heard that you'll consider starting work in 2016. So in other words, 2015 you'll seek funding. And as far as I know, construction costs will be at a high. So this is gonna, I'm quite confident that it's gonna exceed 10 billion. We don't have that many construction workers in Hong Kong. Could you spread it out over a longer period rather than group all large infrastructures together? And regarding the supernumerary posts, you're asking for 9 supernumerary posts, including deployment, seconding. So, do we need so many people during this preparatory stage? The government will recruit people, and then they will engage a consultant to do all the work. So we've added to the cost before the work has even started. So do we have people in-house that could do this work? So let's say we need to recruit so many people. Do we still need to engage a consultant? And lastly, I'd like to ask, have you consulted the sports industry? As I said just now, we've consulted widely within the community, especially the sports community, regarding this series of proposals. We have the strong support of the sports industry. Ms. Jung mentioned staff. We don't have people in-house. At my directorate level, colleagues at the Home Affairs, just the three of us. So if we have such a large project, we need more staff. For example, the cruise terminal, it wasn't, the scale wasn't that large, and they have a team of new colleagues looking at it. Of course, it was just a few years, supernumerary. This is also with a time limit, so we do need new staff to help us. Next, Mr. Yik Jimeng. Chairman, in paragraph 6 and 7, it says that the consultant looked at it. We cannot have fully private sector funding. The government has to shoulder all capital costs and guarantee the private sector a return on equity for it to be viable. So I'd like to ask, this return on equity, well, what's the percentage? So I'd like to hear.
I really want to know whether the private sector investors would really be interested. And concerning the based on the projected return on equity, what is your estimate of the number of consortia that will take part? Yes, Jonathan can reply.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think the percentage return on equity that was being looked at would depend on the degree of risk that the private sector was taking. Obviously, if you're asking the private sector to absorb the full construction cost risk through private sector financing, they would be expecting a return on equity. Our consultants were looking at somewhere between 13 and 15%. However, if you're looking at the government shouldering the greater burden of the capital cost, this could come down to around about the 9% area.
Okay. 嗱，咁你睇翻文章咧，而家今日嘅評估咧就係如果2013年。
Then it is said that we're talking about 23 billion. But then I think we may need an extra 10 billion because construction won't start till 2016. And as a result, the return on equity will become lower. Because according to para 9, and also, as the chairman has pointed out, there won't be too much commercial space, and then you're going to use about 40 billion for the construction. I really don't know how the calculations can be right. Yes, in fact, this is similar to my earlier question on the business plan, the feasibility, and what's the worst scenario? What's the worst scenario?
I think the easiest thing is for us to provide more information from the executive summary, from the actual consultant's report when that is ready. That report is finished. They're now preparing the executive summary. We can furnish this panel and members with some more information. Within that report, there is a clear projection on a base case scenario that, assuming that the government takes up the capital financing cost for this project, the operation of this facility assuming again government taking up life cycle maintenance, would certainly produce net revenues for the operator over the full 25-year operating period that they used. I don't have the exact figure, but we can share that with members of this panel.
好啊，主席，後補資料啊，我諗大家都有興。
All right, so we would look forward to receiving the information from the administration, because I'm concerned about the financial viability of this project. And second, I agree with Mr. Wu Chi-wai and Ms. Ann Chang that a lot of infrastructural projects will be launched in Hong Kong in the coming few years, and there will be a lot of housing projects, and costs are escalating. So it's just really a very urgent project. I'm worried that because of the projected cost escalations, you'll have to come back to us for further funding, because there won't be adequate human resources in Hong Kong to carry out so many projects at the same time. Now we've overrun by 7 minutes, and we've got 3 members who haven't asked questions in the first round. So I'll let the 3 members ask their questions, 3 minutes for each member, and then we'll move on to the next item. Mr. Chan Kwok Chu. In fact, I didn't intend to ask questions, but then I've changed my mind after having heard members' questions and the administration's replies. Now, yes, I think the government hasn't done enough to promote, or rather, now because there aren't too many facilities here for the general public, I don't think the public will want to come here. And then second, I'm worried that the cost may be too high, or I'm worried that if you are guaranteeing the return of the private sector, the government will have to pay the private sector. Now look at the Youth Square in Taiwan, and every year the government is paying the operator $30 million, and the operator is still crying out for help. So will you take another look at the types of facilities to be provided at the MPSC? Now, because once you've embarked on the project, there is no return. And so can you take another look at the mix of facilities to be provided at the MPSC? And how can you make sure that there will be adequate facilities to attract the general public, so that there will be more people going to the place? Permanent Secretary. Now I want to say that this MPSC is going to be a venue that can be enjoyed by the public at large. When we talk to the future operator, we will require that the complex will have to be open to the public, and of course the admission fees, gate fees, will have to be affordable. So we're not trying to exclude the general public from this complex. I don't think there is too much room for maneuver concerning the mix of facilities to be provided. But then we'll consider whether we can try to provide more commercial space, for example, as proposed by the chairman. And then as to whether the future operator will definitely be able to make a profit, we can't say, but then we'll make sure that all our requirements will be included in the agreement to be signed with the operator. Now, Ms. Helena Wong has proposed a motion, and this is seconded by Mr. Wu Chi-wai, and the Secretariat is now making copies for members. Ms. Wong wants the project to be shelved. Mr. Tony Chair, now I represent the architecture planning sectors, and if there is this project, of course, my constituents will be able to take part in the project. Now, of course, I support the provision of more sports facilities in Hong Kong, but I think we need to also look at our sports policy and the promotion of sports in Hong Kong. And we should also look at the synergy between this complex and other sports facilities in Hong Kong. So concerning the design, construction and operation of the complex, I want to say that these three elements or aspects are closely interrelated. And I'm concerned about the construction costs. Chairman, now, in fact, not many consortia are qualified to take part in a project of this scale. Now, if you adopt the design and build model, then a very few consortia can take part, and as a result, the costs will be very high. So you have to choose the best model. I don't think the design and build model will be beneficial to us because very few consortia will be able to take part in the competition. So I want to know whether you've studied the model and also concerning the future operation. The operator needs to make a profit, and as a result, it may not tie in with the government's sports promotion policies. For example, to promote sports for all. And so, has the administration studied the various models? Which model is the preferred model? And if it's a design and build model, then how many bidders do you think will there be? Because there may not be too many qualified consortia. Yes, when we invited expressions of interest, many companies expressed interest with regard to design and operation, and will state very clearly in a tendering document all our requirements. We do not want the operator to be preoccupied with making profits at the expense of public participation. Mr. Tong Chair, I'm not a member of this panel, but I want to raise a few issues. According to the administration, there is a severe shortfall of sports facilities in East Kowloon. Yes, I understand. This is the case. I understand that Kowloon City supports your proposal, and I understand that you're going to consult Wong Tai Sin as well. So my understanding is that we're not providing district facilities in the complex, right? Hong Kong is a small place, and so we can have big venues serving the entire territory. And then I want to talk about transport connections. Now, the cruise terminal has been commissioned, but then for the footbridge, connecting footbridge, we won't have it till, say, 2026. Now, for this MPSC, construction will commence in 2016 for completion in 2020. And what about the bridge project for East Kowloon? It won't be ready when the MPSC is commissioned. And then the cost, 23 billion at September 2013 prices, and it's quite. I think there is quite high, very likely that there will be overspending, and then You are saying that you want to set up a dedicated team within the Bureau, and one of the tasks of the Bureau is to review the PRL. Now, I'm a member of the PAC. I understand the problem, but then the review I think will be about the policy, and I think the review should have started, and you'll be assisted by different departments. So why is it that you need a team to look at the PRL? You may not have enough people within your bureau, but then perhaps you can get the Lands Department's assistance. So I don't think you really need to set up a dedicated team to review the PRL. Now, concerning the last question, I think I've answered similar questions already. So the task force will also take up the task of reviewing PRL. So why is it that your bureau hasn't reviewed the PRLs in the past decade? We're talking about land policies. No, not merely land policies. It's going to be a major review. Other departments can assist. Of course, other departments will give us their assistance. But then the HAB heads the review, and so we need to have people to do the coordinating work. Right, I think we've already completed the first round. We've overrun very severely, so there won't be a second round. Now we have this motion moved by Ms. Helena WONG and seconded by Mr. Wu Chi Wai. And in fact, some amendments have been made. And the Secretary, please read the motion. The panel urges the administration to shelve the MPSC project for 1 year, and there should be an immediate and comprehensive review of Hong Kong's sports policy, as well as and concerning the future mode of operation, synergy with existing sports facilities, and also the hardware and the software, there should be a proper use of public funds so that the MPSC will not become another white elephant. Is members clear about that?
We're not permanently scrapping this request. We're just asking for a postponement of 1 year. We don't have time for further discussion. Well, if you don't have time, then you shouldn't accept this motion. This is an important... You cannot say that there's no time and we need to vote on it. There are a lot of reasons behind, and there are differing views. If you do not allow discussion, then we could vote on this motion on the next occasion, because they're calling for a postponement of 1 year. Well, members can put forward a motion, but there's no time to discuss. How can we make a decision then? Well, then you can decide. We're talking about tens of billions to build a sports complex. If we don't have a full discussion, then how do you deal with a motion to postpone 3, 4, 5 years? We have to have a discussion now. I'm not saying you should arrange for time for discussion. Well, you can put forward a procedural motion to either deal or not deal with this. Not a discussion. We don't have sufficient discussion today, and it's not appropriate to make a decision. Which decision? To have a motion to postpone, I will object, because this is a serious issue. I'm not talking about the motion. I'm just saying procedural-wise this is inappropriate, because such a important agenda item, whether we want to scrap it or postpone, it's not appropriate. In fact, if that's the case, I'll put forward a motion to postpone this motion. So all I can say as chairman, I have to comply with the rules of procedure. The rules of procedure is that members can put forward a motion. Well, if other members can also put forward a procedural motion. Well, Chairman, if members can put forward motions, so I don't see any objections to it. Well, if you say it because there's time constraints, then the administration should withdraw this proposal. We won't deal with it. And deal with it on the next occasion, then we can vote on it. Because if you're saying there's not enough time to discuss this motion, then it's even more unreasonable to spend tens of billions. I can only comply with the procedures. Do we have any other motions? If not, we'll have to handle this motion. What do you mean by handling the motion? To put it to the vote. Well, if you don't discuss, how can you vote? So, Chairman, are you saying that we don't need to discuss and vote? Well, that's not fair to the sports industry. It's not fair to postpone it. I put forward a motion to not deal with this motion. Any second? I support Jie Wai-chun's motion to postpone. Well, we are, as the original motion proposer, we've already put forward I have to handle the motions one by one. We now have Helena Wong and Wu Jiwai's amended motion. I need to handle this motion, unless we have other motions. Well, Mr. Yip Kok Kim, Mr. Yip Kok Kim has put forward a motion to not handle Ms. Helena Wong and Wu Jiwai's motion. Well, if you don't handle my motion today, then we cannot accept the administration's proposal, because my motion is related to the administration plan. We cannot submit it to the ESC or PWSC to start this project. Well, the procedure should be, if we handle Mr. Yip Kok Kim's motion, means that we won't handle Ms. Helena Wong's motion, then we will handle the document. But no matter how we handle the document, even if we veto the government's document, the government can decide whether they will approach the ESC or not. Rules of procedure, Chairman. You cannot have a motion with a supporter and then not handle it because of an objection. I'm now handling Mr. Yip Kok Kim's motion. Where's the problem? So does that mean that with his... well, then why don't you just veto my motion? That's a separate issue. He can put forward a motion to... I think I've made myself clear. Do you have any rules of procedure questions? I want Chairman to tell us clearly. We have a member who will put forward a motion, and as long as another member decide or suggest not to handle that, then does that mean that we will never be able to proceed? No. Well, you can propose a motion. We have no time for discussion. Chairman, I've already said that if we don't have enough time for discussion, you can use your discretion, Chairman. On the next occasion, we can discuss this topic rather than indefinitely suspend my motion. I've not called for indefinite suspension of this proposal. We need to explain to the public why we were spending 20+ billion. I'd like to ask the Secretary, you've heard our colleagues' views. Somebody has put forward a motion. So on the next meeting, in future meetings, will you provide us another opportunity to discuss? If that is the case, then we'll not handle the motions. We'd like you to withdraw your motion. Our attendance today, Chairman, is if you approve, then we'll go to the ESC, PWSC, and we have to discuss on the next occasion before we go to ESC, PWSC. That would delay our work. Well, you've heard that members still want to ask questions, but there's no time. And members have suggested the government suspend this project, but then there are also objections to this motion. So if the government is willing to attend once more, I think that can solve our problem. I have a suggestion, Chairman. The Kai-Tak MPSC, the community and panel are very concerned because it's a large project. We want to do a good job. But we have 3 agenda items and there's no time to discuss. Well, I suggest we convene a special meeting to deal with the Kai-Tak MPSC. So could the administration also present the sports policy? We can hear the public view. Then we can. I don't want to discuss anymore. I just want to ask, will the government discuss this issue one more time? Yes, if you want us to, we have no way out of it. But since Ms. Helena Wong has put forward a motion, even though we don't have time to discuss, I don't mind if you were to vote on it, to vote on suspending. We can vote on it. I don't want further discussion. The government has stated its stance. We're not going to discuss this, Mr. Yip Kok Kim. I would agree having another meeting. We don't have time today. I've raised my hand many times, but I have never spoken. Well, first of all, since we have so many motions, should we handle them when they're raised? Mr. Yip Kok Kim has a motion and someone seconding it, so we should comply with procedures. Could we postpone agenda items number 4 and 5? We don't want to delay this application. Could you consider? You're further complicating matters. Well, the government has expressed its stance. My decision is we'll convene another meeting. And if we have the members' support, then we don't need to deal with the 2 motions. We can either continue on the next occasion or convene a special meeting. A lot of questions. I just don't know how to ask. Are you telling us that you're not going to handle this motion? I'd like them to withdraw it. And the condition is convening a special meeting or including this item in the next meeting. So this is an exchange. So will they put forward this motion again? So these are 2 separate issues. Do you realize? Let me repeat. Are you saying that if they withdraw, then we'll scrap it? It's just that the Secretary will explain the MPSC. But if you're saying no, you're saying that if we have a special meeting, we'll have to deal with the motion again. Let me ask again, Ms. Helena Wong. Helena Wong? If I say on the next meeting we discuss this document again, would you withdraw your motion on this meeting? Yes, I can withdraw, but we're not just discussing this document alone. They should provide a sports policy. We'll discuss sports policy, and then we can continue this discussion. Okay? Because that would be a responsible approach. We have a lot of new members in the panel. So they should provide the sports policy and then discuss the Kai-Tak MPSC. Then I'll withdraw this motion. Well, if you want another document and another agenda item, that's another issue. That's separate from our discussion of this agenda item. Then I can only comply with procedure. Well, why don't you ask the administration, can they provide a sports policy document? We already have an agenda, but we haven't established the discussion time. We have already pledged to update you on the review of the sports policy. I've tried to mediate, so I can only handle Ms. Helena Wong's motion, and there's also a procedure motion put forward by Mr. Ip Kok Kim to not handle Ms. Helena Wong's motion. Well, then we need to discuss Mr. Ip Kok Kim's motion. Should that be put to the vote first? If we have no time for that, then using the same logic, my motion cannot be discussed as well. Well, that's an unreasonable request. We're already out of time. Well, Chair, it's the same logic. How can you say, how can we, without sufficient decision, to derail another motion? Please do not interrupt my speech. Mr. Ip Kok Kim's motion is a rule of procedure motion. He just stated his reason, and I do not wish to discuss that. I can only handle it. Okay? Is that clear? She has not withdrawn.
Right. So we have a motion moved by Mr. Ip Kok Kim and seconded by Ms. Starry Lee. And that motion, Chairman, in fact, the permanent secretary said that the administration would have to review Hong Kong's sports policy. Now let's discuss Hong Kong sports policies at a special meeting. And then we can also then I can withdraw my motion for this meeting. But what I said was sports policy for Hong Kong would be a separate item. Chairman. No. Chairman. I think today's discussion will trigger more discussion in the community on the MPSC. So, Chairman, please ask the administration to come again to discuss the MPSC. But you are only the seconder of the motion, and what the proposer has said is different from what you as the seconder is saying. Chairman, we just want to get things done. Yes, I think that's the common wish of all members. So my request is this. I want the permanent secretary to prepare a paper for us on sports policies, and then in our discussion we will discuss or we can ask questions on sports policies. So I'll withdraw this motion, and we'll have discussion again at a special meeting. I hope that a special meeting can be convened as soon as possible. All right? So, in fact, I have said we'll either have a special meeting to discuss this paper, or we're going to discuss this paper again at our next regular meeting. And I've also said very clearly that sports policy is a separate issue. It's a separate agenda item. So, Ms. Wong, do you agree with Mr. Wu Chi-wai? So I think, Chairman, I hope that you can make the necessary arrangements as soon as possible. And please, let us have an opportunity to discuss sports policies as soon as possible. All right, so we'll discuss this paper again next time. So we'll not deal with the motion and the two motions. So, Mr. Ip Kwok Him, I believe you also withdraw your motion, right? Okay, thank you. So let's quickly move on to the next agenda item, and that is signature project of Kwai Ching District. And I hope that if members want to propose motions, please do so. About not towards the end of the discussion of the item. Right, we have with us Mr. Raymond Yang, Permanent Secretary, Mr. Patrick Lee, Deputy Director of Home Affairs, Mr. Alan Low, District Officer Kwai Ching, and from the Kwai Ching District Council, we have Mr. Chow Yik Hei and Mr. Dennis Leung. Permanent Secretary, yes, thank you. On the 10th of January 2013, the CE delivered his policy address, and he said in the policy address that the signature project scheme would be launched to strengthen district administration. So district councils are given funding to implement signature projects. So these projects are to be proposed, implemented, and monitored by the district councils. Now, district councils have proposed various signature projects, social services, and other community projects. And the Bureau and the Home Affairs Department have been giving district councils full support. And we now have the signature project of Kwai Ching District before us. The idea has come from the Kwai Ching District Council. And the Kwai Ching District Council proposes to provide community healthcare services, including dental services for the elderly, and then the community fitness equipment and information kiosks will be provided. So the proposal is in line with our policy and our requirements, and with members' support, we hope that we can go to PWSC in February or March, and then we'll go to FC for funding approval. And I thank the two district councillors for being present today, and maybe Mr. Chow or Mr. Leung can tell members more about the proposal. Yes, Mr. Lee. Now, in fact, Mr. Leung, now, in fact, we do always collect views of the residents on the development of the district, and in fact after discussion in the district council, we've come to the view that we do not have suitable sites in the district for hardware development, and we are of the view that enhancement of community healthcare service can better serve the needs of the residents. And so we hope to launch the signature project of enhancement of community healthcare services, and our proposals include dental care services and also ophthalmic care services, and will also be providing community fitness equipment and information kiosks. This proposal is supported by all political parties represented in the district council. We will also try to disseminate the health message. We hope that residents can change their lifestyles, and we also hope to help them prevent chronic diseases, and we hope to facilitate early identification of chronic illnesses. A few thousand elderly citizens will be able to get dental care services and ophthalmic services. There will also be community education efforts, and there will be community fitness equipment and new information kiosks. These services will be provided primarily by two non-profit-making NGOs, and the Kwai Ching District Office will also give the two organizations its support. Now, the funding is is one-off, but in order that the residents can continue to benefit from such services, we will be having discussions with the two NGOs on the continuation of such services on a self-financing basis. For example, the operation of mobile dental clinics by the Yan Chai. And we will, in the service agreements, insert minimum service and performance indicators, and the district council will also receive regular progress reports from the NGOs. There will also be regular reviews. The district office and the district council will also carry out site inspections and to collect views and to monitor the service provided. Mr. Chow Yik Hei, good morning, Chairman. Good morning, members. I just wish to supplement here. And that is, I, of course, am representing the Kwai Ching District Council, and in fact, I am wearing another hat, and that is, I'm the chairman of the Kwai Ching Safe Community and Healthy City Association. Now, we facing a problem of an aging population in Hong Kong, and we hope to help elderly persons age in place, and we also hope to promote primary health care. And in fact, in our district, we have been exploring the model of collaboration among welfare organizations and also medical organizations in the community to serve elderly citizens. And so I think this is a good opportunity for us to gain more experience. All right, how many members would like to ask questions? And also Yik Chi Ming and Chang, because we overran very seriously for the last item, and so we'll have to finish this item by 10:30. So each colleague will have 3 minutes, including replies. Ms. Alice Mack. Chairman, I'm also a Kwai Ching District Council member. So I also suggested that dental care service and ophthalmic service be provided to elderly citizens. Now, in fact, our public sector is not providing adequate dental care service to elderly citizens, but it seems that the administration hasn't been responding to our requests. So we're trying to do as much as we can using the amount of money available. And in fact, in the past year, we had a few meetings. We were grateful to the district office for its support. The district office did a lot of information collection for us. And we have got a very experienced partnering organization. We have got very experienced partnering organizations for this exercise. I'm sure we're going to encounter difficulties when we implement these initiatives. But then there is a working group under the district council to keep the project under review and supervision. And if there are complaints, they will be handled by the district council. in a very speedy manner. I hope that members will all support the project. Now, we won't be able to really launch the project till the end of this year or early next year, and so we hope that the project can be launched as soon as possible. We hope that we can really help those in need, and I hope that we can serve as or this project can serve as a role model for the reference of the Food and Health Bureau. And also, those beneficiaries of the project are those aged 60 or above. Now, in fact, many of the elderly services provided by the government or the private sector are for those who are 65 years old or older. But then many are of the view that in fact those between 60 to 64 also need such services. In fact, for CSSA recipients, if they are at 60 or over, then they will be able to get dental service. So we are aligning our criteria with the CSSA criteria. I have no questions for the administration, and I would like to thank the HAD and the District Office for their support in designing this unprecedented project. Thank you. Mr. Ip Kwok Him. Yes, Chairman. I represent the District Council constituency in this LegCo, and I'm glad to see this first proposal from the 18 districts. I fully support this project. Now, if I lived in Kwai Ching, I would need to declare interest because I've reached the age of 60. There is no means testing. Those who satisfy the age criteria can benefit, and I think this is really very good indeed. But I've got some questions. Now, in fact, $100 million is really a small amount for a project of this nature and of this scale. And I understand that more than $7 million will be required as administrative costs. And so I really doubt whether the amount of money available will be enough for the project. And we are told that this project may continue in the future. So I just want to know whether it's feasible. And then you are able to provide the services for so many people using only this amount of money. And so perhaps, and if this project proves to be a success, and I think we should recommend such a model to Dr. Ko of the Food and Health Bureau, because they are serving many people, including those who've reached between age 60 to 64.
Put simply, and we respond, in this project design, we have worked with the two district council cooperation partners to use the dental healthcare. We are relying on the existing Yanzhai Yun operation and collected information. We're confident that within this scale we can achieve our performance pledge. Regarding the funding of $100 million, it's only one-off, but we have focused on the sustainability of the service. So after the $100 million is spent, we have suggested purchasing 2 mobile dental vehicles. So the capital expenditure has already been spent, and Yanzhai Hospital is willing to operate it on a self-sustaining basis and will continue to offer services at a 20% discount. Zhongguoqu, a lot of districts have thought about spending the $100 million on building a monument, and I'm very happy that Kwai Ching District is spending the money on elderly healthcare services? Well, I'd like to understand, first of all, do we have some elderly who can't afford $3,000 and they don't do their cataract surgery? Have we discussed with HA when you subsidize $5,000, will they still be able to collect the $5,000? So it gives people the impression there's double benefits. So they need to clarify a little bit. Second, dental services can receive a subsidy of $10,000, but your focus is on some $3,600. So if they don't have sufficient funds, the services will cease. Is that the case? Thank you for your question. Put simply, the 100 million spending is limited, so district councils in their study, they've looked at it in depth and thought about how the 100 million should be distributed. Well, if the threshold is high, it's good for the recipient, but then other elderly people might not be able to benefit from this item. So after the studies, they've thought that the $10,000 threshold is appropriate. We also talked with the Yanzai Hospital that usually the elderly dental care can be covered by $10,000. Regarding the cataract surgery, the suggestion is that aside from the $5,000 subsidy with the hospital authority, an extra $5,000 would be subsidized. So cataract surgery typically costs $13,000. So where will the extra $3,000 come from? So in our suggestion, CSSA elderly recipients are not included. So if there are people with financial difficulties, usually they already get benefits from CSSA. So the district council felt that the $5,000 subsidy should be sufficient. You see, right? I feel this new approach is very good. We have an aging population, so 100 million being spent is heartwarming. In paragraph 17, they want to achieve so many projects with only 100 million. But there's no auditing. Auditing needs a lot of resources. So within 3 years, if you exceed 100 million, then what's going to happen? Some people say they're waiting in a queue, but those at the end of the queue might not benefit at the end of 3 years. So how you deal with that? Thank you for the question. Well, first of all, we have two types of services: community health, seminars. We welcome everybody. Another type of service, such as dental care or optometry services, well, they need to have a physical need. If they conduct an eye inspection, they might need to make an appointment with an ophthalmologist, and we'll provide services for them. So we won't see a rush of elderly people. There's a preliminary checkup, and we do have some statistics. And if we feel, if the health professional feels that they need to be further referred, we'll have the necessary arrangements. We believe that our service target can satisfy the current demand. Well, Mr. You might ask, if we have a larger than expected demand, then in the next stage, we'll discuss with our partner whether they should draw lots or provide service on a first-come, first-served basis. Lastly, the performance pledges will be included in our partner. So whether legislators or members of the public, we can disclose this performance pledge. And Jaya Hospital and our partners will have to provide the services. 胡志偉 Providing community services rather than building hardware is more effective in addressing public's needs through government resources and district council awareness. So I support this, and I also hope that the relevant district councils, if they might have suggestions in the past, it might have been controversial. I would like to promote this approach. So my question is, the Kwaiting scheme might attract recipients from other districts. So will this only be limited to Kwaiting residents? If not, then how can you handle the demand that might outstrip supply? Since this is a Kwaiting district-led, it will serve the Kwaiting residents, especially for high-cost services. So, first of all, we will request the recipient make a declaration that they are a Kwaiting resident. They need to provide proof of address. If we have individual cases where there's difficulty, we will handle it individually. The relevant work seems to be sustained through cooperation with the Anzai Hospital. Have you talked to the hospital authority that if this is successful, then there should be a mechanism to convert this into a recurrent service? Has there been relevant discussion? From the initial phases, we've liaised with Social Welfare Department and Health Services. Of course, the experience will be referred to in the 2 Policy Bureau. As Ms. Makayukun mentioned, the design and the progress has been satisfactory. We feel that the support in the District Council is very encouraging. The HAB and District Council are aware that there's a lot of work ahead of us. Our success will depend on how it's implemented. I've worked in Kwaiting for 3 years plus, and we need to be careful, and from my experience, we need to be careful in the implementation. Time's up. Next, Yip Jimeng. As other colleagues, I have to commend Kwaiting's proposal. Compared to other projects where they build hardware, this is very good. I want to follow up on Yip Kok Kim's question. If response is good and you're over budget, then what's going to happen? You answered that there would be a 20% discount, but they still have to pay. What if they don't have money? there's a sustainability problem. Second, you now have 2 mobile dental care vehicles, but we have a shortage of dentists. So people in queue, can they get the dental care service in 3 months or get the cataracts done in 3 months? You haven't provided this information. Third, the 3.8 million publicity fee. Well, I think counselors are very willing to help you, so you might be able to save some of that money to serve more cataract and dental care patients. And we mentioned proof of address. I'm nitpicking again. I live in Taiwan. My son lives in Kaiqing. How do I provide proof of address? Will you allow the father to enjoy the benefits as well? Well, I think first of all, the funding is one-off, so we can only provide a limited service. So whether it's a district council or HAB, we'll look at whether there are other financial resources to provide further discounts. The second question is about recruiting dentists. We believe the longest queue would not be dental services. It's rather the vehicle facility. We need funding, and we might need 18-15 months to outfit the vehicle because it's a specialist equipment. We asked the manufacturer, they need more than a year to convert the vehicle. The third question was about the 3.8 million publicity fee. Well, first of all, I have to thank legislators, the Kaiqing district councillors. They've been working very hard to promote this. Okay, let's finish your sentence. We'll see if we can reduce the advertising fee. Just now I mentioned we've overrun significantly, so we can only discuss up to 10:30. We still have Tan Ji-Chun, but previously Zhang Lai-Wan also wanted to speak, but I'd like to allow more time for the next item, so we won't allow you to speak anymore.
So I think we will move on to the next item. But then before that, can I ask members whether they really endorse the content of the paper? Chairman, last time, or rather, you didn't say that you had drawn the line. Now, so is it that after you've asked who would like to speak, then now I just want to know the principle, your practice. Is it that you've asked and then you draw the line and you'll never allow others to speak? Because I said I would draw the line at 10:30. I think I am doing what according to what I have said. So do members support this paper? All right, so this paper will go to PWSC and then to FC. All right, any objection? All right, do members support this item? All right, so we'll support this item, and we need to move on to item 5 now. Licensing and enforcement matters under the Hotel and Guest House Accommodation Ordinance. From the administration, we have Mr. Raymond Young, Permanent Secretary for Home Affairs, Mr. Jack Chan, Deputy Director of Home Affairs, Mr. Winston Leung, Chief Officer, Licensing Authority, and Mr. Tony Chong, Senior Divisional Officer, Licensing Authority. The Permanent Secretary, please. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Now, since the fire at Continental mentioned, we've heard views from electrical members and members of the public that when licenses for guest houses are issued, consideration should also be given to the content of the deed of mutual covenant. Now, the Hotel and Guest House Accommodation Ordinance seeks to ensure that the premises are safe so as to safeguard the safety of lodgers and the public. Now, the licensing authority looks at the sanitary fitments, building safety, fire safety, and according to the ordinance, the DMC is not one of the factors to be taken into account by the licensing authority. The DMC is a private covenant among the owners, the property manager, and the developer of a building. The government is not a party to the DMC and so has no power or obligation to interpret the provisions. And we can't really enforce the terms of the DMC on behalf of any party. Now, I want to say that we do have guidelines and application forms for licenses. And it's made clear that the DMC will not be affected by the issuance of a guest house license. So an operator of a guest house has to comply with the DMC. The fact that he has got a license from the licensing authority doesn't mean that he can be exempted from the compliance of certain conditions of the DMC. But then we need we know that we need to let OCs and managed companies know as early as possible whether there is any application for a guest house license in relation to the building concerned. And that's why we've got this arrangement. When we receive an application for a new license or an application for renewal, we will inform the OC, the property management company, as soon as possible, and the information will be uploaded onto the OLA's website as soon as possible, so that the OC and the management company can study the DMC terms to see whether they want to take any action under the DMC. Now, concerning the review and whether the law should be amended so that the DMC terms also need to be taken into account by the OLA. Now, we adopt an open mind on this matter, but we need to study in greater depth the pros and cons of adopting such an approach and whether such an approach can really help us deal with the problem of unlicensed guest houses. Now, I want to point out that in many older buildings, the DMC doesn't really prohibit the guest house use. And we also will have to look at the comparability between this licensing regime and other licensing regimes. For example, we may have bars, restaurants operating in residential or buildings with residential portions, and there's no need for the licensing authority to take into account the DMC. We are of the view that basically there is no problem with a guest house being accommodated in a building with a residential portion. Now, what is most important is that the guest house must be properly licensed, because the OLA looks very carefully at the fire safety requirements, building safety requirements, and also the maximum capacity that can be allowed on the premises. All these factors need to be considered by the OLA before the OLA decides to issue a license. In fact, we have had very few accidents involving licensed guest houses. The problem is mainly with unlicensed guest houses. And as stated in the paper, the OLA has got more manpower resources to combat unlicensed guest houses. The OLA has adopted a multi-pronged approach, including publicity enforcement. In the past 5 years, concerning inspections, number of inspections, prosecutions, and convictions concerning suspected unlicensed guest houses, the numbers tripled, or but then we understand that there will be this problem of unlicensed guest houses if we can't satisfy the demand for accommodation on the part of budget tourists. And so in our review, we'll look at whether amendments to the ordinance are required so that the enforcement capabilities of our officers can be strengthened. Let me give an example. Now, at the moment, under the ordinance, the burden of proof is very stringent. We may be able to obtain the price list, the accounts books of the unlicensed guest house, but we still can't take any action. And we very often have to have undercover operations or so-called snaking operations. We have to catch them red-handed during the transaction. And in fact, many of the guest house staff are extremely vigilant, and our undercover operations may not be successful every time. And we may not really be able to enter the premises whenever we want to care. No, there are penalty clauses. The maximum penalty fine is $200,000, and there is also an imprisonment term provided for in the ordinance. But in many cases, even in cases of convictions, the fine was only $2,000 or $3,000, and as a result, there were we've seen repeated offenders. So we'll have to look at the penalty levels. We'll also need to look at in the review whether DMC terms need to be taken into account when the OLA issues licenses. But then we'll have to consider all the pros and cons and the implications first. All right. Q&A. A total of 10 members would like to ask questions. Alice Smack, Helena Wong, Chen Chi Chun, Cham Kwok Chu, Yip Kwok Kim, Chair Wai Chun, and Chair Yu Swing, So 3.5 minutes for each member, including replies. I'll have to enforce the time limit very stringently. And also we'll have to extend the ending time of the meeting by 15 minutes. Ms. Alice Smack, yes, I've got 2 simple questions only. Now, the Permanent Secretary has said that the DMC is a private treaty or a private covenant, and so there are difficulties involved. But then, in fact, all those who live in the building have to comply with the DMC, and in fact, it's quite unlikely that the terms of a DMC can be changed or amended. So, why is it that the OLA can't make reference to the content of the DMC in vetting a guest house application? Because the DMC clearly states the permitted uses. So I hope that the Bureau can consider the proposal concerning considering a DMC in vetting an application. Now, you said that it was difficult to collect evidence, but then I understand that budget tourists usually find cheap accommodation on websites, on the internet, on the forum. So can you try to collect more intelligence on the internet? Now, I'll address the first point, and then my colleague can address the second one. Now, the ordinance doesn't permit us to consider DMC terms. the OLA can also only consider building safety, fire safety, and we can set the maximum capacity. So we'll be acting ultra vires if we consider factors outside those stipulated in the ordinance. Now, either the landlord operates the guest house or the landlord leases the premises to another party who would like to operate a guest house. And so I think landlords need to enforce the DMCs themselves, and it will not be appropriate for the government to enforce the DMCs on their behalf. And in fact, we do have dedicated staff to monitor information on the internet. Mr. Chan. Yes, Chairman. We understand that it's common practice to advertise guest houses on the internet, and for visitors to book guest house rooms on the internet. So we have a dedicated team comprising 8 staff members. The team looks at whether the guest houses advertised are licensed guest houses, and we take action if necessary. And then if we discover that there are unlicensed guest houses putting up advertisements, we will post a warning on the internet urging people or visitors to patronize only licensed guest houses. Ms. Helena Wong, thank you. This morning, the Democratic Party Kowloon West branch petitioned outside the electrical building, and a letter was given to the secretary. I believe there are many unlicensed guest houses in residential buildings, and we've received many complaints that these guest houses cause a nuisance to the residents. And in fact, we've seen a lot of loopholes in the present licensing regime. At the moment, the OLA only looks at building safety and fire safety, and if these requirements are met, a license will be issued. There is no need for the OLA to consult the residents living in the same building, whether they like the idea of having a guest house in the building. And you do not have to take into account the content of the DMCs. It's true that not all buildings have DMCs, but many of them have. And for some residential buildings, commercial uses are banned under the DMCs. So how are you going to plug the loopholes and inadequacies in the law so that you have sufficient powers to exercise necessary control and regulation in order to minimize nuisances caused to residents?
There's security issues, fire safety, and do the residents in the building have a say? Because a lot of our complainants say that you ignore them. So can you tell us how you deal with the problems? I didn't say a lot of buildings don't have a deed of covenant. I just said that they do not stipulate the ruling out of guest houses. Of course, we don't need to consult the tenants, but we will notify the tenants of the building and all the parties to the covenant, the tenants, the owners. We do that so that they can be made aware there is an application for a guest house, or we're about to approve a guest house. And if you feel that the covenant prohibits that, then they need to take appropriate action according to the covenant to stop the guest house. Now, that's the crux of the issue, Chairman, because you're only notifying them now. The tenants' request is you need to consult them so they can decide whether their building should host commercial guest houses. Not notify, consult. Do you have such a mechanism for them to reject a guest house? So will you consider the reform direction? We can consider anything right now, but to consult the tenants before issuing a guest house license, we need to consider the consequences. Well, you can consult the tenants of a building. 9 out of 10 will object. So we need to consider whether we need to take that step. For example, the LLB or mahjong parlors, we have consultation because it's a hotbed of crime, but a guest house is not. 产地区. Illegal guest houses are an urban time bomb. So the attitude should not be drawing a line and you just stand behind the line and do what you can do behind the line. Because in paragraph 6, the government says the government is not a party to the covenant, so they have no, you cannot intervene. So this, I don't think this attitude is appropriate. Of course, for old buildings who don't have owners incorporated, owners might not be aware of their rights. So has the administration educated these old building hotbeds of guest houses? If you just drawn the line and feel that you can't do anything, and you tell us that we need to expand your powers, then I think the LegCo would coordinate their efforts. Regarding inspection of illegal guest houses, paragraph 10 says that OLA will conduct an inspection within 8 working days. So, aside from receiving complaints, do you have your own investigation work? When you receive a complaint and when you suspend their license, it seems like a long interim period. There are a lot of obstacles in between. Or how soon can you complete this work? I agree with Mr. Chan's viewpoint that illegal guest houses are a danger to life and property. And the situation we're facing is quite grim. So that's why we're targeting these. And we already explained how we target illegal guest houses. But the DMC, the Deed of Mutual Covenant, is not the only way we can handle it. You cannot link those two ideas. So OLA or Mr. Chan can elaborate on your other question. In targeting and inspecting illegal guest houses, we spare no effort. So aside from receiving complaints, we also take the initiative. As I said, we have an 8-person group that surfs the internet for guest house information. We also have people looking at newspapers, tour guides, not just Hong Kong publications, also overseas and mainland publications. So once we receive that information, we will initiate our work and will identify illegal guest houses. I mentioned the 8-person team. When we receive information, we will take action immediately. When we see a commercial on the internet, we will try to register and collect information. Zhengguoqu. We have a lot of licensed guest houses. Tourists might arrive at the registered the licensed guest house, but might take them to the unlicensed guest house. Why are they unlicensed? It's not hard. If your building structure and fire safety, they can get the license. You don't need to worry about objections from other tenants. So why are they still unlicensed? The guest house license requirements are not just building structure. In fire safety, there are quite a lot of requirements. They need smoke detectors, illumination, bed sheets, and such. There are strict requirements. So some unscrupulous operators want to avoid the inconvenience and operate illegally. So is it very common where people they might have you're talking about shadow guest houses? We treat them as illegal guest houses. The mother guest house could be licensed, but then they take people to illegal guest houses. So these are also the main target. We have guest houses that provide accommodation for school children from the mainland. They take them to school, house them, and so on. So anybody who provides accommodation at cost needs a license. But if they provide a service for more than 28 days, they don't need a license. It's like lease. I don't need. I do not need a license for when the lease is more than 28 days. I'm aware of this situation, but which department is responsible for monitoring this? Because there is a potential danger. The HAB is responsible for licensing. If any premise is regulated, we will target them. Ip Kok Him, Chairman. The main problem is not illegal guest houses. I'm aware, HAB, you are doing your best to target them, but my concern is with licensed guest houses. The document says that we're not intervening in the DMC. You're saying it's not your responsibility. So the government has no responsibility to heed the DMC. So how can you convince the public to heed the DMC? It's under Cap 344. HAB is also the main bureau to enforce this law. If you're saying it's a residential complex, it's not a commercial complex, and you grant a license without examining the DMC, how is that possible? Then LLB don't need an inspection as well. And signs, neon signs. So shouldn't the HAB review the DMC? That is what district councillors are most concerned about. So my question is, does the government not need to heed the DMC? And the guest house ordinance is your responsibility. Have you reviewed this legislation? We need to ensure that there's no contradiction between guest house ordinance and DMC. As I explained just now, Chairman, we are conducting a review. The focus will be on allowing us more law enforcement powers. The public's main concern is how to target illegal guest houses, because there is a threat to life and property. You should answer my first question. How does the government comply with the DMC? The government does not have an obligation to heed building DMC. Let me repeat, the government has no obligation to comply with a private building DMC regulations. So who has to comply? The parties to the DMC, the owners, the developer, or the management company. But you don't comply with the regulation. You are granting a license. I'm talking about licensed guest houses. You granting the license. You're saying they should pursue this in civil proceedings. Time's up. Next, Jia Wai-jun. Before we have sufficient supply to deal with the individual travelers, this targeting of illegal guest houses, but a relaxed attitude to licensed guest houses is understandable. But when the government targets illegal guest houses, it's insufficient. Whether we have the 28-day exemption or shadow guest houses, we have tourists signing 28-day leases, and they are using this to disguise their illegal activity. That's one reason why you can't enforce the law. So you should pay attention to this. And as a matter of fact, the penalties are insufficient. So have you appealed any of your cases? If you look at the Schedule 2, all your sentences, we have a case in 2013 where they were imprisoned of a couple months, but a lot of them were suspended sentences. The 3,000 fine is just viewed as a licensing fee. So could we take a serious case and appeal it? And we should collect the view of the CFA on this issue. So the government has a public interest consideration. If you have any public interest to not issue a license, the courts could not object to this. So I suggest the government, if we already have a design, ingress-egress that is problematic, they should deny the license. And the applicant should try to appeal that. And the government can therefore establish a case. We're not talking about a criminal offense, but a transgression against the DMC. And the courts should allow this to be a test case.
And then if that fails, then you should seriously consider amending the legislation. Third, I understand that you do proactively check the websites. You also issue warnings. You warn people that they should only patronize licensed guest houses, but then the tourists don't know what the arrangements are in Hong Kong. You have to, I think you should give very serious warnings to tourists, and that is, you'll be, these are unlicensed, these are unlawful, and that will be dangerous to patronize these guest houses. And I don't think the administration has got time to reply. Next member, Mr. Kwok Wai Keung. Chairman, the OLA is merely responsible for issuing the logo sticker to the guest house, so that the tourists will not knock at the wrong doors, so to speak, in the building. But then do you know that the residents are subject to nuisance, and but then it seems that the government doesn't care. Now, do we still need an OLA if it is only, or if its own function is to issue the sticker? Because we have the fire services department, we have the buildings department doing their respective jobs. But then I understand that the OLA merely reminds the applicant that he should observe the DMC terms. So you just issue a reminder, you not doing anything to make sure that the applicant or the operator observes the DMC. So you just insert one sentence, you don't do anything. Now I want to say that DMCs are drafted by the developers, and the content has to be endorsed by the government. So the government approves DMCs, the government issues licenses, and what if the two contradict each other? Now the OCs feel very aggrieved. Now the Home Affairs Department encourages OCs to be set up. OCs have been told that the HAD will give them a lot of support, but then OCs have complained that the support given is not enough. For example, legal advisory service. The Home Affairs Department hasn't deployed lawyers to help OCs interpret DMCs. You are now, in fact, putting the entire responsibility on the OCs. You're asking them to interpret and enforce the DMCs. Now, if it's an unlicensed guest house, then of course the OC will have to take action in accordance with the DMC. But then the license is issued by you. The DMC bans commercial users, but you issue a license to permit a business or a commercial use. And you're asking the OCs to pay for a lawsuit if necessary. And maybe the OC will not win. So who will have to bear the cost? Why is it that you are passing the buck to the OCs? I think the OLA should shoulder this responsibility. I think you should require the applicant to produce evidence that the application doesn't contravene the DMC. Ms. Ann Chang. Yes, Permanent Secretary, I do understand that under the Hotel and Guest House Accommodation Ordinance, there are certain requirements, and you simply follow those requirements. Now, it seems that things have been going on well. But then, according to the Tourism Board, the number of visitors and tourists to Hong Kong will exceed 42 million next year, and the express rail link will be commissioned soon. Yau Chim Mong will become even busier districts. You know, there are lots of guest houses in Yau Chim Mong, and I think there are these problems. Now, many, including electrical members, of course, are concerned about the fire at Continental Mansion. And for guest houses with an area less than 230 square meters, there is no need for the operator to install a sprinkler system. But then, you know, these budget tourists or visitors may boil some water or do a bit of cooking in the room, and so fire may occur rather easily. And then guest houses or guest house licenses can be issued for residential buildings. You know, the residents are complaining. You the residents are very worried. There are many strangers going in and out of the building, and it's no use having a password for the residents, because too many people are coming in and out, and there is little that the security guard can do. In fact, I visited one building with guest houses, and the OC office bearers were extremely angry. And do you know that there are now guest houses in Whampoa Garden, and there may be guest houses in Mei Fu. Now, these are residential areas. These are residential estates. But then, according to your licensing policy, guest houses are allowed. And maybe some, that we may one day see guest houses in the luxury residential developments in West Kowloon. Now, Permanent Secretary, members have suggested that when the OLA receives an application, it should also consult the residents in the building. Now, you know that in some buildings in Yau Chim Mong, 90% of the units are guest houses. And so even if you consult them, there will be no objection. But then there are also residential buildings with still a lot of residential units. And then for flats under the area of 330 square meters, there is no requirement that a sprinkler system be installed. So will you consider amending this requirement? Ms. Enchen, time's up. Mr. U.C. Wing. Last year, Chairman, there were over 9,000 inspections. And I think this figure shows that the situation, the problem of unlicensed guest houses is beyond control. From July last year to January this year, there were 44 prosecutions, and then in about 2 or 3 cases, the fine was $10,000. In the other cases, the fines were only a few $1,000s. So such levels of fines, in fact, are encouraging to people. They all want to turn their flats into guest houses. So I think the penalties and the law should be reviewed. And also, if the court hands down a lenient sentence, you should seek a review of the sentence. Now, if you don't do these two things, and even if you increase the number of inspections to 20,000 times, that would still not help. And last year, a customer was raped, and then it was said that even for licensed guest houses, people could go in and out freely. There was no control. So this will really tarnish the image of Hong Kong as a tourist destination. I understand that the OLA looks at fire safety requirements and building safety requirements. What about security requirements? We hope that the management of licensed guest houses can be enhanced. Thank you. Permanent Secretary. Yes, Chairman. The first point mentioned by Mr. Yu, and that was also mentioned by Mr. Po Chair, the penalties. Yes, we'll look at whether we should review, or seek a review rather, of the sentencing for some particular cases, and we'll also in our review look at the penalties stipulated in the ordinance. Mr. Chen may wish to supplement. Yes, Chairman. And in fact, in the past, there were 26 cases of imprisonment, and in 13 cases, the operators were imprisoned immediately. And we've also got some measures to step up our actions. We have a new system whereby concerning operators of unlicensed guest houses who have been convicted, their information will be passed on to relevant departments of follow-up, RVD, IRD, and even mortgage banks or monetary institutions. For example, the IRD can follow up on whether there has been any tax evasion. Or if the mortgage bank knows that the premises were used as at an unlicensed guest house, then the bank may impose a penalty or take other necessary action. It's true that we take into account fire safety and building safety. Security is not really one of the criteria, but we do advise the operators to step up security. Mr. Wu Chi Wai, I think we really have a dilemma here. The tourism industry has been saying that more affordable accommodation be provided to tourists, including lodging in residential premises. Now, we've been talking about the revitalization of our industrial buildings. We've discussed whether we can have youth hostels in revitalized industrial buildings. So can you consider the idea of approving guest houses in industrial buildings and not residential buildings? We need to be clear about the use of a building. At the moment, we have mixed uses. And then I do not agree that the HAD doesn't have the responsibility to make sure that the DMC is observed. Now, let me give an example. Now, you know, employment contracts are contracts between the employers and the employees. But look at the extent of the intervention of labor officers. Look at how much they are involved in the interpretation of the terms of employment contracts. So if we use the same logic, why is it that labor officers of the Labor Department can get so involved in the interpretation and enforcement of employment contracts, while the Home Affairs Department, being the primary authority under Cap 344, is telling us that it won't intervene with regard to the interpretation and the enforcement of DMCs? And so concerning your role and your functions in building management and your role in interpreting DMCs, I think there should be a comprehensive review. It's not acceptable to tell us in 2 or 3 sentences that you are not responsible for that. Now, the labor officers provide information to employees, and they may also seek to mediate. But you are not doing such things. You are not doing anything to provide assistance to OCs in the interpretation and enforcement of DMCs. You are not trying to give any assistance to mediate before the matter finally goes to court. So I think while you are reviewing the licensing procedures for guest houses, you should also review the HAD's role in interpreting DMCs. Thank you.
I don't fully agree. You referred to a labor inspector intervening with labor relations and interpreting the labor law. But HAD colleagues also help Owners Incorporated in interpreting the DMCs. We feel that we don't have authority and responsibility in helping tenants and owners to implement or to comply with the DMC regulations. We don't have the authority to implement. Okay, I need to disclose I'm a victim of an illegal guest house. Well, we need to end the Q&A session here and enter the last item, item 6, AOB. We have not received AOB, so we conclude here. Thank you very much.